What are these things called again? A graphics card. We have a graphics card. I haven't... Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed. Today we're revisiting the topic of graphics card pricing while also looking at a new graphics card. Something we haven't done in quite some time because of, well, graphics card prices. On hand I have the new Asrock RX 580 Phantom Gaming, and we'll put this thing through its paces shortly. For now though, let's talk a bit about the current market conditions. It's fair to say it's been a rough ride over the past 6 to 12 months for those hoping to build a new gaming PC, or even a used PC for that matter. This time last year though, it was happier times for PC builders. I mean, sure, DDR4 memory prices were still quite high, but today they're almost 50% higher. The most extreme barrier to entry though for PC gamers has of course been the graphics card. And I think 12 months ago, you could have quite easily picked up pretty much any model for the MSRP, and an RX 588GB, for example, well, they were selling for $230 US. Today though, gamers can only dream of those kinds of prices. Don't know why I'm laughing. I think it's just so silly now, it's just a joke. Anyway, by June, prices had already started to rise, and before long, getting a gaming graphics card at anywhere near the MSRP became a real challenge. By April 2017, the average RX 580 cost $260 US, then $310 by November, and by January 2018 we were seeing pricing exceed $600 US. More recently though, as in the last month, we have started to see prices fall back down as cryptocurrency mining cools off for a bit, and GPU mining, for various reasons, becomes less appealing. The result has been a drop in price to $350 US, which is still outrageous, but shockingly a big improvement from where we were just a few short months ago. Pricing for the GeForce GTX 1060 6GB is similar, though we are seeing more models selling for around $320 US. Even with a drop in demand for graphics cards, it's unlikely we're going to see prices hit MSRPs, as there's still that whole mess with DRAM supply pushing pricing up. And as a result of what's going on there, Samsung, Micron and Hynix are getting sued for alleged DRAM price fixing. Kickstarting 2018, I created a 3-part series titled Why Building a Gaming PC Right Now is a Bad Idea, and part 2 discussed graphics card pricing. I predicted at the time that this issue wouldn't rectify itself till later in the year, and as we approach the midway point of 2018, that ominous prediction is looking more and more accurate. Still, things are improving, and if you've been desperately waiting to get your hands on a graphics card, is now the time to give in and pull the trigger? Well, honestly, I'm not really sure if it is or not. Personally though, I'd probably give it another month and spend that time monitoring which direction the prices are heading. There's also the issue of whether or not you should even invest in a current generation GPU. At this point, we are very deep into the product cycle and are expecting new products from both Nvidia and AMD before year's end. Despite all this though, Asrock recently threw their hat into the ring by signing up to become an exclusive AMD Radeon partner. Their new Phantom Gaming series includes RX 550, RX 560, RX 570 and RX 580 graphics cards, and they've sent over the flagship model, the RX 580 8G Phantom Gaming XOC. So, more than a year on since the refreshed Radeon RX 580 was first released, we have a new RX 580 to review. Technically, this GPU was released in June of 2016, so almost 2 years ago now, and the worst part is back then it could quite easily be picked up for $240 US, which was the MSRP. Anyway, let's not dwell on that any more than we have to, and take a quick look at Asrock's RX 580 Phantom Gaming XOC to see if it has anything new to offer and how it stacks up against the premium RX 580 models. Out of the box, Asrock's factory overclocked RX 580 comes with a mild 3% increase in frequency, hitting a boost clock of 1380 MHz. The GDDR5 memory has been left stock at 2000 MHz effectively, allowing for a transfer speed of 8 gigabits per second. The real differences though can be seen when looking at the PCB and cooler. All the Phantom Gaming graphics cards rely on PCBs and coolers developed by Asrock. The higher end RX 570 and 580 models pack larger coolers featuring 2 fans as well as an aluminium radiator with a copper base and 3 heat pipes. Asrock claims to use premium thermal paste as well and double ball bearing fans to maximise the lifespan and efficiency of the cooler. Then, in an effort to maximise compatibility, all graphics cards include a DVI output, DisplayPort and HDMI outputs in order to connect all kinds of displays. Tearing down the card is extremely quick and easy, as just 6 screws are needed to be removed. Doing so reveals a fairly compact PCB featuring a 6-phase VRM which is fed power via an 8-pin power connector. That's pretty standard stuff really. The cooler itself is also quite compact and in total weighs just 384 grams, so don't expect the Phantom Gaming to offer class-leading thermal performance. The Aorus RX 580 XTR, for example, packs a 647 gram cooler, and you'd better believe that almost 70% more metal to dissipate heat with makes a serious difference. I should note that there's also no backplate included, and in total the card measures 280mm long, 127mm tall, and 42mm wide, making this a dual slot card. So let's quickly put the Phantom Gaming to the test and see what it's got. All testing has been conducted on our Corsair GPU test rig powered by the Core i7-8700K clocked at 5GHz with 32GB of DDR4 3200 memory. All results were updated specifically for this video, and we have tested with the latest version of Windows, game patches installed along with the latest display drivers. Okay, let's get in the results. First up, we have Assassin's Creed Origins, and here the Asrock RX 580 spat an average of 51 FPS at 1080p using the highest quality in-game preset. This made it 1 to 2 FPS slower than premium models from MSI and Gigabyte. Much the same was seen at 1440p, and here the Asrock RX 580 was a whisker faster than the old MSI RX 480, and as you'd expect, 15% faster than the RX 570. Trying out Battlefield 1 at 1080p with the ultra quality settings saw a smooth 88 FPS on average when using Asrock's new RX 580 graphics card. Again, this was a few FPS off the pace of the MSI and Gigabyte models, which feature much larger coolers. Still, the Asrock model remained strong at 1440p and again delivered playable performance, which is pretty typical for an RX 580 in this title. Far Cry 5 is a well-optimized title. It was sponsored by AMD, and here we see the Asrock RX 580 matching Gigabyte's Aorus GTX 1060 with 77 FPS on average, which is comparable to the other RX 580 models tested as well. Although we failed to exceed 60 FPS at 1440p, the performance was still very reasonable, and again the Phantom Gaming was on par with the tricked out GTX 1060, packing 9GB per second GDDR5 memory. Unlike Far Cry 5, Fortnite prefers hardware from the Green Team, but having said that, the RX 580 graphics cards do well enough, pushing over 60 FPS at all times with maxed out settings at 1080p. Even at 1440p, the performance was decent, though for this fast-paced action shooter, you really notice the difference between rendering over 60 FPS and rendering less than 60 FPS. Using maxed out quality settings, these graphics cards breezed through our Rainbow Six Siege benchmark, and the Asrock RX 580 managed to deliver over 100 FPS at all times when playing at 1080p. Even at 1440p, the RX 580 Phantom Gaming provided well over 60 FPS at all times, and was roughly on par with models from MSI and Gigabyte. Finally, we have Vermintide 2, and here the RX 580 and GTX 1060 GPUs provided very similar performance. The Asrock Phantom Gaming did only match the MSI RX 480, but that did put it within 1 to 2 FPS of the other RX 580 models tested. Moving on to operating temperatures, and here we see that the thermal performance wasn't anything overly impressive as we expected given the size and weight of the cooler. Hitting 74 degrees made the Asrock model 2 degrees hotter than the MSI model and 3 degrees hotter than the massive Gigabyte card. Given the size and weight of the cooler, those aren't bad results, but it did mean that the bigger coolers on the MSI and Gigabyte cards did ensure slightly higher operating clock speeds. Here's a quick look at the operating temperature using this stock out-of-the-box settings. As you can see, when playing a round of Star Wars Battlefront 2 against some bots, we saw a peak temperature of 74 degrees after 20 minutes of gameplay. For headphone users who don't really care about operating volume, you can crank the fans up to 100%, and this reduced load temperatures to just 61 degrees, again after 20 minutes of gameplay. Using the OC mode, which we will look at shortly, increased the operating temperature by just a degree, but it also increased the fan speed by around 400 RPM, so the card was noticeably louder. Again, if you don't care about operating volume, then cranking the fan speed up to 100% with the OC mode enabled does drop the temp down to a peak of just 66 degrees. And as a side note, this configuration did allow us to average over 60 FPS at 1440p with a minimum of 52 FPS after a 20-minute test. The other issue you face when using a small heatsink is increased operating volume, as you are required to move more air over the smaller surface area. We see this with the Asrock Phantom Gaming RX 580, which hit 50 decibels on our meter, which was positioned half a meter away from the system in a quiet room. The other graphics cards were all tested under the same conditions on the same day, and we see that the only model to generate more noise is the super noisy AMD reference design Vega 56 graphics card. Anyway, Asrock's RX 580 isn't ridiculously loud when under load, but it could very easily be heard over the rest of the system, and was noticeably louder than the MSI and Gigabyte models. When it comes to power usage, the Asrock RX 580 is more efficient than the MSI and in particular Gigabyte models. It dropped total system consumption down by 12%, and that's quite impressive given that it was never more than 5% slower. This just goes to show how a graphics card model used for representing the power consumption of a GPU can really impact the results, and in this case the Aorus RX 580 XTR did so quite negatively. Finally, just a quick look at overclocking, and included in the bundle is the Asrock Phantom Gaming Tweak software, which looks and feels very similar to the MSI Afterburner software. Using this software, you can quickly enable the OC mode or silent mode, or you can just do some manual overclocking. You can also monitor and tune the fan speed, increase the thermal and power limits, as well as monitor GPU and memory usage. It's a neat little tool that works very well. Enabling the OC mode increased performance by 4% in Far Cry 5, and this placed the Asrock RX 580 just ahead of the Gigabyte and MSI models. Then manually overclocking the core to 1.5 GHz and boosting the memory to 9 gigabits per second increased performance by 10% over the out-of-the-box configuration. So, solid overclocking performance from our sample, but unlike the MSI and Gigabyte cards, which are extremely quiet when overclocked, the Asrock RX 580 is a bit of a jet. There you have it, the new Asrock RX 580 Phantom Gaming, a mediocre graphics card that you'd probably expect to sell at the base MSRP, if graphics cards sold at the MSRP at all. Although I compared this model to extreme models such as the Gigabyte Aorus Radeon RX 580 XTR 8G or the MSI Radeon RX 580 Gaming X 8G, I expect that it will take on the more mundane versions such as Gigabyte's RX 580 Gaming or MSI's RX 580 Armor, for example. I'm assuming as much anyway, as the Phantom Gaming graphics cards are yet to go on sale in the US or Australia. For now, Asrock tells me that availability is limited to Japan, Korea, Thailand, and Latin America. They haven't said when they expect them to hit our shores, so I can't really say when you'll be able to get your hands on one if you're a fellow Aussie. As I said earlier, right now you can expect to pay around $350 US or about $490 Australian for a base model RX 580. And, well, I'm hoping this is where Asrock's Phantom Gaming RX 580 will slot in. If and when it becomes available, of course. I guess the big question right now is, should you buy a Radeon RX 580 at all right now? At today's inflated prices, which are at least $100 US over the MSRP, I'd say unless you're extremely desperate, just hold off for now. As I said, we will be seeing new GPUs arrive later in the year, and with a new supply of GPUs, it is possible prices will come down to the MSRP. It's possible, I'm not sure it'll happen, but I remain hopeful anyway. As a quick side note, the RX 580 and GTX 1060 remain very competitive in modern titles, so I would recommend you forget about brand loyalty altogether. The market's just too crazy for that nonsense right now. If you need a mid-range GPU, just get whichever one is the cheapest. And that is going to do it for this one. If you did enjoy the video, then be sure to hit the like button, subscribe for more content, and if you appreciate the work we do here at Hardware Unboxed, then consider supporting us on Patreon. Thanks for watching. I'm your host, Steve, and I'll see you again next time.